This is TV Podcast Industries, and we're talking about The Watchmen, Episode 1. It's summer, and we're running out of ice. Welcome back, fellow watchers. This is TV Podcast Industries, and we're watching The Watchmen, Episode 1. It's summer, and we're running out of ice. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hi there, fellow watchers. I am one of your other hosts, John.
And rounding out this group of people that watch other people watch TV shows, I'm Chris.
Welcome to all of our new watchers who are joining us for The Watchmen. This is probably one of the most anticipated shows of the year, The Watchmen on HBO and on Sky Atlantic in Europe. The episode just aired on HBO on the 20th of October, and it's airing on Sky Atlantic on the 21st of October. My birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thanks very much. Wasn't fishing for that or anything.
Well, you fished for it, yeah, exactly. And you've caught a big red mullet.
I think I might have called it cost tiny shrimp, maybe. Possibly.
A great white shark.
But if you're joining us for the first time, let's just quickly set up who TV Podcast Industries are. We've done 428 episodes of our podcast so far, talking about TV shows. But that's what we do. We talk about TV shows. We don't review them. We discuss them. We're like your virtual water cooler in the place you want to work, as opposed to where you actually work. You probably have us in your earphones in your workplace listening to us talk about TV shows that you want to talk about. But we want to hear from you. We want to hear your thoughts about TV shows in future. We've been doing this a long time. We're hoping that our thoughts about The Watchmen are going to enhance your enjoyment of the show as well.
Yeah, either our thoughts or our sort of nonplusness or blanks. You know, it may be something we don't get, and other people are going, I didn't get that either.
Right, yes. Or maybe you can help explain it to us as well.
Okay, that will be me then, okay? That will be me.
I was wondering, it sounded like you didn't understand anything that went on in this show. We are talking about the first episode of The Watchmen, a very complex series. There is going to be some very interesting stuff in here, and this is spoiler-filled. All of our discussions are always spoiler-filled when we get into the episodes. I'm really excited to talk about this show. Chris, what did you think so far of this show?
I'm enthralled, I'm enthused, give me another E word. Intrigued, but that intrigued with an E because I'm slightly dyslexic. I don't know. I'm all the E's. I'm absolutely loving it. It's one that I've been cautiously optimistic about for quite a while. It comes from a very, historic, background in both the director, the showrunner, as well as the source material itself, which has spawned spin-offs, which has spawned a film, which is now deeply ingrained in the new DC universe, and the current storyline. So there's a lot of eyes on this product. So I'm happy to report, again, this is spoiler filled. I'm happy to report so far I'm enjoying it.
Excellent. We talked about a lot of that on our Prelude podcast. If you didn't get the chance to listen to that, we did talk about our connections to the show and to the comic books. This is definitely only based on the 12-issue comic book series, not in the movies, and it's kind of a remix of that even. There is some changes being made apparently to the full comic book as well, but it's slightly remixed from that, but definitely not based on the movie. And I think I love this quote from Damon Lindelof that I saw this week where he said, it's absolutely not based on Doomsday Clock at all. That involves DC superheroes, and we're not touching that with a 10-foot barge pole. So he's like, no way am I going near that stuff. So John, overall, what do you think of the episode?
I really, really enjoyed it. I found it massively tense. I think the tension is just ratcheted up from that opener where you're just looking at in disbelief the fact that, you know, this literally happened. That biplane with incendiary devices being thrown from the air actually happened. And you're just going, okay. And so it just builds just how sort of ingrained that type of feeling or behavior towards other people is. And so it just makes the 7th Cavalry chilling. So it just, the tension is there. It's one of those things, with, thrillers, horrors or whatever. For me anyway, is when I think that someone at some point, at any point within the show could get shot. I'm just waiting for it. And of course it never happens. And then it does.
Yeah.
And it scares the bejesus out of me. So it's kind of one of those things, really, where I found it really tense. I really enjoyed it.
Can I spoil one moment of watching this episode with you, John, if you don't mind? There's a moment where Don Johnson, his character, Judd, is dancing around the table and having his song with the whole family, with Johnny King's family. And John thought there was going to be a bullet come through the window and kill him in that moment where he's singing the song from Oklahoma around the table. He was so tense, even in that scene, which is supposed to be a jovial family scene with all these people around. John's going, he's going to die, he's going to die, he's going to die right here.
The emotion that they've set up with this is astounding. And they've actually managed to make you care very quickly about core characters, which usually takes a lot more time for a series like this. So before we get into it, I'll close with this because I want to get in and talk about a lot of it. I really do think that this is setting a precedent in the level of showmanship, production, and the types of shows we'll get going forward. This is a show, based on what I've seen so far, that has taken and looked at all that's come before it and taken the best. In terms of the story, in terms of the realism, the gritty nature, the soundtrack, all those things. I think Lindelof really he's kind of like a chef at the moment. He's picking a lot of the parts that have worked for a lot of other shows and a lot of other pilots and sprinkled this in together. He's basically the Salt Bae of HBO at the moment.
Absolutely. And remember, this is a HBO show. They are known for their premium qualities as well. You know, this is definitely one of those shows that stands up against all the other shows that we've talked about in the past. Really good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something I was going to say. HBO have a history with good TV, going all the way back, at least for me anyway, to The Wire. So yes, I am looking forward to this for sure.
They've been looking for their new Game of Thrones all year. What's it going to be? What's it going to be? Will it be this? This is only a 9-episode show, so we don't know whether there is going to be a second season at all. And Lindelof has said it's crafted as 9 episodes, so we'll see what's going to happen.
Yes. That's just some of our top level thoughts. As we said, we want this to be a water cooler type show as always. So make sure you pop over to our website at tvpodcastindustry.com and leave us a voicemail, to what your thoughts are, what are you thinking of episode 1, what you thought of the prelude, the source material. Tell us where you hope it's going to go, and we'll make sure that is included in future episodes. Don't forget to also subscribe on any Minutemen or Crimebuster supporting podcast player of your choice.
Definitely. And of course, you can send emails through to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com.
So with all that out of the way, Derek, do you want to tell us who served up this platter, the smorgasbord of an episode pilot?
The shrimp-filled smorgasbord, yes. David Lindelof is your showrunner for the show. He has written the first episode of the show. He's very clear to point out there is a writer's room in here, all involved in these episodes, especially an episode probably as sensitive as this, dealing with massive, massive issues. He's not the only writer on the show. This is absolutely a team effort, but he has got the main writer's credits for this episode. From Lost through to The Leftovers, he's massively talented. He's written 6 episodes of this season already. We discussed him quite deeply in our preview podcast, so I'm not going to give any more detail about Damon Lindelof other than to worship at his feet as a hero of mine. I think he's fantastic, and I love what he's done with the show so far. The episode is directed by Nicole Kassell. She's an executive producer on Watchmen and directed some of the best TV shows of the last decade, including season 2 of American Crime, which had Regina King in it as well. Also directed 2 episodes of Damon Lindelof's The Leftovers as well, and loads more shows. Check out her work over on IMDb. She's got some really, really good shows that she's done over the last couple of years. John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with the official episode description?
Absolutely. Detective Angela Abar investigates the attempted murder of a fellow officer under the guidance of her friend and chief, Judd Crawford. Meanwhile, the lord of a country estate receives an anniversary gift from his loyal servants.
Short and sweet, the synopsis that come in for these episodes, and not a huge amount being given out about the episode at all, but we have got a brand new structure for our discussion for the Watchmen podcast. We'll go through it again because it does take a little bit of explaining. In the real world, the doomsday clock signifies how close the human race is to a man-made global catastrophe. It's been reviewed and changed 24 times since it was first launched in 1947 by the members of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. As of January 2019, the clock was set to 2 minutes to midnight. We're each going to choose our top 3 moments in our countdown to 2 minutes to midnight. So our biggest point from the episode is our 5 minutes to midnight moment. The middle moment is our 4 minutes to midnight moment. And our final discussion item will be our 3 minutes to midnight. We'll end our chat at 2 minutes to midnight.
The doomsday clock has been set to 5 minutes to midnight.
So, John, do you want to kick us off with your big moment at 5 minutes to midnight on the doomsday clock?
Definitely. I mean, for me, I have to be right up front here and say it's the Tulsa 1921 moment. The moment where, you know, we see this attack on the black population of Tulsa. I found this like really impactful. You know, firstly, it's through the eyes of, you know, because it's starting off in the cinema theater with the kid whilst his mum's practicing the score, to the black and white silent movie.
Yeah.
And so it all seems kind of fairly calm. And then you get that kind of rock of the cinema and you can see that actually, the kid's mum is a little distraught. She's kind of a little nervous playing the piano. And then the man, her husband, you know, barges in with his rifle in what looks to be an American army uniform.
It is, yeah, yeah.
And so, you know, then you realize something is not quite right. It's a little unsettled. And then you get into this world of being completely unsettled because what you're witnessing is this all out sort of white supremacy attack on the black population of Tulsa. And, you know, it's through the eyes of this family and particular with their child, their son. And, you know, you have that moment where it's watch over this boy, this note, as the parents effectively sacrifice their space in the car so that their son can make it out of Tulsa alive. And I think then you realize and you read into elements of this episode and the stuff done before it aired by Damon Lindelof, and you realize that, you know, this is based on real life events.
Yeah.
And I kid you not, when I checked it out, because I was thinking, okay, it is, but they didn't drop bombs from a biplane. You know, that is almost like it's almost like Pearl Harbor before Pearl Harbor. And it's like, but that actually happened. There were incendiary devices, thrown from planes on the Greenwood district of Tulsa. So it's a race riot, but it's also known as the Tulsa Race Massacre, or the Black Wall Street Massacre, because you had this whole district of Tulsa, this black district with businesses owned by black people, and that's why it was called the Black Wall Street. It's one of the richest black districts in the US at the time, and it was completely sort of taken down by white supremacists, white residents. With, you know, there were people died and there were many injured, and so that to me is just like, what an opener. First of all, a part of American history I certainly never knew anything about. Yeah. It really sets up the themes of this series by the looks of it, with the hooded 7th Cavalry and sort of that sort of surrogate for the Ku Klux Klan and that race hate. And I found this really, really impactful. And it's, you know, I didn't expect that opening, and I certainly didn't know that bit of American history with these Tulsa race riots / massacre, effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And they get across a couple of quite major things in such a short period of time. You know, it was a coordinated attack as well. That's one of the things that they get across quite well, because you see people effectively dressed in Ku Klux Klan kind of outfits. So they're all have arrived in the area at the same time, planned to attack at the same moment. It shows off the fact that this is a very wealthy district as well, because you see the white guys who are breaking into the shops owned by the black residents are taking the items that they have inside. They're taking fur coats from indoors and trying them on in the streets while kicking the black residents on the streets as well. You know, it's showing off all of these things as this young child is being dragged out and being saved by his parents. Also, as you said, the note is written, saying take care of this child, is written on the papers that confirm that his father was fighting for the American government in the army. So he
Yeah.
is a vet that's come home. So all this stuff being gotten across in such a short time. And as I say, a biplane dropping a bomb in a local district to take out because the residents are starting to make a bit of money for themselves. It's truly a terrifying scene.
Yeah,
Really
it's really weird. I think two elements as well, just from a pure sort of framing and shooting. I absolutely love the claustrophobia given by the kid in the box, and then when you have the bullet whizzing through it, I thought that was really amazing.
Yeah.
And through one of the bullet holes in the box, he sees effectively the garage blown up by this plane, where his parents have just sort of, well, I think they're still in it basically. And I think the other thing is later on when you see that the car has crashed and the two the couple that were taking him to safety, I think either had died in the crash or had been shot themselves. There's that great moment where he's on the dirt track and you just see Tulsa burning behind him in the darkness of the night. And then that dirt track of 1921 turns into, a modern highway in 2019. So I thought there were really nice little moments in transition within that as well.
Yeah, I think we can definitely confirm though that the people that were taking him were both murdered. They were both shot in the head, because we see that back shot of the woman on the ground with the piece of her head missing effectively as he gets out of the car. Terribly traumatic experience. And the child that they were carrying with them to save is who he takes into his arms and takes away and saves then. So yeah, I think we might talk a little bit more about that character in the future. But it is so interesting that you get this opening moment and there's no mention of this kid's name at all. We don't get it until the end of it. We just hear that he's watching Boss Reeves on screen, this Black Marshal of Oklahoma, this hero for their times effectively, and what's going on outside is effectively saying there's going to be no heroes. The community is now being destroyed. So it's a fascinating opening.
Yeah, it also sets the tone, as we said, but it also sets a visual tone for the episode. It's HBO. I was never expecting it to shy away from blood, guts, violence, sex, gore. It's a HBO Max. It is what it is, but it visually also tells it from a storytelling perspective. So showing the blurring slightly as the child is looking in, so that the cinematography of it, even chosen with kind of select blurring. But at the same time, the gore, as we said, so seeing that woman lying in the field, any other network wouldn't have shown that. They would have just potentially kind of panned to a leg with some blood on it or something like that. Yeah. It sets up, that this is within the first 5 minutes. This will be shows the grittiness of realism, of reality. So for me, that also hammers home the fact that, okay, though this did happen. So as you said, like this did happen in the 1920s, and being able to show the truth of that. Being able to show the realism of that is always an impactful thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think you're right. It sets that tension. It definitely sets that tension because effectively you realize, this is an unsavory business kind of happening here.
Oh yeah.
And you now know that there is a rise of that within the modern day.
Exactly. Chris, that probably takes you on to your biggest point about the episode, right?
It does. It's 2019, Jim, but not as we know it. That's just the one special for all my Trekkies. So my biggest point, my biggest kind of the thing that I'm enthralled with right now with the show is the alternate history take.
Yes,
definitely. Of the 2019, that setting that is being set up.
Yeah.
Not taking into account, I'm going to put the squids for later. We can talk about that later on. Because that's a whole other business. But just the mention that Robert Redford was president.
Yes.
Talking about Nixon's second term. Talking all these little things that you have to read. You have to watch the background. So it took me a second, for example, the Robert Redford being president, for example, right? The reason that took me, they first say President Redford. And I'm like, okay, that's a new one. And actually in the classroom, in the background is the photos of the presidents.
Yeah.
The core one being Robert Redford, the well-known actor.
Mm-hmm.
He's right there. His headshot is shown. And then you go, oh, Robert Redford.
Yeah.
And it's then said later. So little things like that.
Yeah. Because this is a reference to the comic book that at the end of the comic book when Richard Nixon is going for impeachment much later than he did in real life, much later than what happened to him in real life after Watergate. He passed through the Watergate scandal in the comic books, no problem. But it's a reference to the comic books where Robert Redford did run against him in the next election that was going to be happening in 1986, I think, from the comic book. So it says, I don't know whether he won that election, but he did win one later on and has now stayed president for quite a long time as well. So it's quite interesting. So, yeah.
Exactly. So usually you would have a 2-term presidency in the US. Mm-hmm. They don't show a photo of another president after that.
He's somewhere in 20 years as a president, I think is where we're thinking.
Yeah.
It's even referred to by the kid that looks like the new Rorschach, just cause he's got a ginger hair and the freckles, just like Rorschach did in the comic books. He refers to reparations as the Redfordations as well. So it sounds like Robert Redford's administration paid reparations to the local people in Tulsa. So that's quite interesting that they're called the Redfordations. And I wonder, is that an offensive term even, that this kid is using? Because everybody seems to get very angry with him when he uses the term Redfordations.
Yeah. Angela has a nice thing, there. She's got some really, good little lines here, but because I think her son, attacks the kid who said Redfordations, and she goes, no, he's not a racist, despite what her son is saying. He's not a racist, but he's got a good start in life.
Yes.
Which I thought was pretty nice. Mm-hmm. She comes out with a few belters, I think, in this.
Certainly does, yeah.
Yeah. The additional thing is obviously the shutting of the police force, and it becoming a whole different thing, which we'll talk about more. The use of, let's say the night owl, the night jet, the owl jet.
Mm-hmm. Archie, we think. Yes.
Yes. Or at least a facsimile of Archie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically like the co-opting of superhero, technology into the police force. Mm-hmm. So it really for me it's the most interesting thing that I'll probably kind of spiral into, which is, it is 2019, Jim, but it's not as we know it. There are going to be all these little changes mentioned that will have spiraled their universe, their timeline out from our own. Mm-hmm. And what those changes, so Nixon getting a second term, Redford being president for 20 years, the change of the police force, the mentioning that all the police were attacked on that particular day, and because people knew who the police officers were, that their families were targeted, they were targeted at home, and that being one of the, actually that's what I personally think the Redfordations are. Basically it's for police officers who were attacked by the 7th Cavalry, or potentially African American police officers who were targeted by the 7th Cavalry, and that's why now they wear masks.
I think Angela Abar references that as the White Night, which was a night where police officers were shot and killed for being police officers. Now, she doesn't talk about it being black or white police officers, but the assumption there is because of the tension that's going on in the city that's what's caused it, I suppose.
Yes. So that for me really is my biggest interest, my biggest area that I'm dying to know more about.
Yeah, because there's even a little mention from Angela Abar that she's from near Saigon. She was born in Vietnam before it became another state of the US, and now she is a citizen of America because Vietnam is now part of America, you know. So that's a reference to, again, Dr. Manhattan arriving before a Vietnam War and stopping it effectively. So they've now been annexed into the USA. So some really massive changes that if you haven't read the book in a while, or if you haven't seen the movie in a while, then suddenly you're kind of going, what's going on here? What Vietnam is what? You know, so yeah, fascinating piece of this. And there's going to be loads more of the stuff that was just wheeling by me. I was writing down my notes. I had a whole page of things that were different in here than where in real life, you know, so really interesting stuff. My big moment from this, and I'm going to only have a few more seconds to talk about it because we are under the doomsday clock. We don't have a huge amount of time to talk about these points. My big moment really is the tension of a tune throughout this episode. And I think it begins right at the beginning back in Tulsa, where you have the kid's mother on the piano, because she is playing the tune like you would have seen in old movies, to black and white movies. You have the piano playing, but she starts to break down because she knows exactly what's going on. She's actually keeping her kid entertained until her husband can come in and save him. But you hear her cracking on the piano first before you see her face and before you see her tears. And then throughout that scene, you'll hear that music just go. You hear Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor's music just amp up over and over again. And throughout this episode, their music is used to just heighten tension in scenes that shouldn't be massively tense. They've done this many times before as composers in other shows and other movies, but I felt here it's just used to the extreme. It's done fantastically throughout the episode. The other side of it, so not only is just Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor's score that's going on, there's the whole pinning of the whole storyline on the musical Oklahoma. The song that Don Johnson sings at the table is a song from Oklahoma. The play that they go and see is a black version of Oklahoma, black only actors in the roles. I love that when Don Johnson calls it black Oklahoma, he's told, no, you're not allowed to say that. That's only for us to say. You, just because you're friends of me, you're not allowed to say that in front of me, says Angela Abar, you know. So there's still some tension even there. I know she's kind of joking with him, but there's still some tension even between the two of them because of how heightened everything is in this city, you know, between all of these different sides. So it's really interesting that they use this underpinning of Oklahoma right to the end, because the tune that's playing over the body, I suppose, at the end, that's swinging from the tree, is a song from Oklahoma that's effectively saying that we're not going to be able to give you a good wake because it's summertime now and all the ice is melting. We don't have ice to display your body. We're going to have to bury you in the ground, effectively. So it's a really interesting little mechanism that they use. If anybody's aware of the comic books, the way they usually ended each chapter of the comic books was with either a quote from a song or from a poem to close out the chapter of the comic book. So interesting to see that what he's done here is used Oklahoma as kind of the central point to hang the first episode on, I suppose. So I'd say the tension of the tunes throughout this episode was something that really jumped out to me in the episode.
Definitely. I mean, I agree. I think that will be a nice little touch if they do this at the end of each episode. And I think that's a nice little way of referencing the comics. Again, I think Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor, they do that tense tune really, really well. And it's probably another reason why I felt a tension in this episode. Yeah. And also, I like that kind of slight contrast between the Oklahoma musical and how that music is done with the music that Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross does. And also just that very kind of, you know, industrial electronica for the end credits.
Oh, I love that.
I found it jarring in a way that is really, really good because it just provides that nice contrast with everything. It wasn't the end credits theme that I thought they would have used. But I think the music was just massively strong within this episode for sure.
Absolutely.
Does
sound like the doomsday clock is getting moved again.
The doomsday clock has been set to 4 minutes to midnight.
So with the doomsday clock at 4 minutes, John, what's your medium point to talk about for this episode?
My medium point is the masks, actually. You know, masks, and more masks. I think I was expecting Jim Carrey to kind of, sort of pop up, and start doing his thing.
Somebody stop him.
Yeah, exactly. But I really liked it. And I think, obviously, you know, this idea of hiding your identity, this physically, but it kind of speaks slightly, wider today with, technology, encryption, all this kind of stuff. Right? So, you know, this is the first form of masking your identity and who you are and why you do it. Mm-hmm. It is the mask. And whether it's that classic Rorschach, mask from the comic and the movie here on the serious bad guys. You know, Rorschach in Watchmen comic was never a pure good guy. He was absolutely, flawed to a T. And he had, you know, extreme views but he was working with people that had different views. And
Well, absolutely. I think that's a really good point to say this, because the whole purpose of the Rorschach mask is it's used by psychologists and psychiatrists to say, have a look at this and see what you see in the mask. And Rorschach was holding that face up to the world, and the world would tell him what he thinks. So it's really interesting that you see the 7th Cavalry here using that mask as their face that they're showing to the world. You hear that statement that they make in their big speech that's being played to the police officers, and they're going, the streets will be flowing with liberal tears and they'll ask us to save them and we'll say no. That's a real moment that you remember from the comic books and from the movie of Rorschach saying people will be screaming for him to help and he'll say no.
Yeah.
It's a great little touch there, but it also comes just quickly. It also comes from Damon Lindelof, where he says there was a moment earlier on this year where both Ted Cruz, a right-wing politician in America, and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, a very left-wing politician in America, both used Rorschach as a reference point to illustrate their beliefs and illustrate what they were into. And he's like, there's a sliver of a Venn diagram where AOC and Ted Cruz are both really excited about the fact that we're going to have a show with Rorschach in it. So he's kind of saying, we can bring the left and the right together by this idea of the Watchmen.
But it's that classic Rorschach, and yeah, it's holding that mirror up to the world. Mm-hmm. And I suppose the literal form of that was it Mirror Mask, played by Tim Blake Nelson, who is kind of the undercover agent for the Tulsa police force.
I think that might be my fault, because Mirror Mask is a Neil Gaiman book that was turned into a movie, I think, or a Dave McKean movie, I think, that Neil Gaiman wrote, something like that. So I got that wrong. It's Looking Glass is the character that Tim Blake Nelson plays. And what I love about that as well is that effectively his face is used as a mirror for Judd to tie his tie. It's like the coolest looking character. You saw it all the way through the trailers for the show. This coolest looking mask that you put on that shows your face back to you, and he just uses it to tie his tie. The interrogation scene, though, is fantastic.
No, it is. It's really amazing. Mm-hmm. You have all the different images from that pod reflected in the mask of Tim Blake Nelson. So yeah, it was really good. Mm-hmm. And obviously everyone to some degree or another, is wearing a mask. You have the yellow kind of half mask of the police officers to protect their identity, as well as, other members of, I suppose, for want of a better word, the Tulsa Special Forces.
Panda.
And, yeah, so I really liked that. But I think on the flip side of that as well is, the chief of police, Judd Crawford, isn't wearing a mask. He doesn't have the mask at all. So he's always, with the police, so everyone knows who he is. And so, it's interesting that meal that, Angela and her family are having with him and his wife, that to an extent then, is this undermining who is in this secret police force? It's that great moment where Angela, I have this bakery, this Asian bakery, and goes in and she's got her keypad and, the secret doorway to her kit in order to go and sort of track down one of the people that she suspects is in the 7th Cavalry. Mm-hmm. Again, another one of those great lines from her, I got a nose for white supremacy and he smells like bleach. I have to say that is a pretty quality line. And I think so it's I like the fact that Judd Crawford doesn't have that mask, but whether he's putting his policemen and women in danger, I don't know, because he even goes to the wife of the police officer who's been shot completely
in his dress blues,
with no sort of face mask or anything like that. So I thought that was just interesting, having the masks. Absolutely. It is superheroes. Who's behind the mask? Playing on that Batman idea.
Yeah, and playing on the Watchmen. It's this whole concept of who's wearing the mask and what are they wearing. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm absolutely enthralled by this part of it as well. And what I'm guessing is you start as a police officer, you wear just the uniform and the yellow mask. You become a detective or an officer of some kind. You then your own superhero persona is born. And that ranges from Looking Glass, and Angela Barnes' character, kind of the priest, the nun, as someone kind of refers to her, to the Russian, the Rusky, to Panda. It kind of like, depending.
Panda
like,
who reads out the rules. It almost felt like something in a South Park there, didn't it?
But it's kind of like, if we all would come
Panda.
up with a really shitty superhero, potentially some of us would come up with really cool ones, others would come up with, I'm gonna be a panda.
Yeah. It's really easy. I'll just take the head off my teddy bear and stick it on my head when I go to work. You know?
So it's really
whole
interesting.
Concept, I'm sure there's loads more to come out about the masks as the episodes go on. There's certainly a hierarchy in there, Chris, and I think you've guessed some of it. I was wondering whether it was something to do with them not being from the US. The Russian obviously is wearing red. We have Angela Abar, who's from Vietnam, wearing the black mask, but she's cool as hell, and yes, she is a detective, and then the lieutenant is the one that's in the Looking Glass reflective mask. So interesting to see what that will be as the episodes go on, but really interesting to see one side, the 7th Cavalry, everybody wearing the same mask, and then on the other side, we've got the tension building up between those two. Very cool. Very cool. My middle point for the episode is gonna be about this character that we don't have a name for. Because I'm wondering whether he has a place in the country or is it just in the mind. Jeremy Irons plays the unnamed character in here. He's playing who you think he's playing, as they've been constantly saying to us. I thought we were going to get a name in this first episode. All we get is Master, as he arrives on his horse. But there seems to be something odd about this mansion that he's living in, this beautiful place. I think it's filmed in Wales, actually, in the UK, where Jeremy Irons is riding up to his mansion. He goes inside and he's told it's the anniversary of his time there, I think. And his 2 servants, are doing some very odd procedures on him. They're massaging him while he's lying naked, and he's saying, go ahead, no problem at all. And then they bake him a massive cake, but they have no knives to cut it with, which feels very dreamlike to me. It feels like he's being trapped within some structure that's not in the real world. Almost.
Yeah, I mean, he's offered a horseshoe, isn't he,
instead of
to
a
cut
knife.
the cake. So you get a snippet of a newspaper headline where it says Vice is declared dead. So it could be, is he dead? We know what he was trying to do, this idea of being a higher being. Is it that he's trying to, bottle his consciousness to some extent, and so it's in his mind space or something like that we're seeing him here? Or is it, say, that he's under house arrest because of what he did? And so this is, it's an interesting thing to see it suddenly set in this Kassell horses, servants, even the names Miss Cruikshanks and Mr. Phillips, probably spelt double L,
yes.
Is all very hoi polloi, hoity-toity.
But there's something
kind of
off
thing
about it. Like it just feels like it's not in the real plane of existence in some sense, and that wouldn't be a surprise to me.
Yeah, he's writing his novel on a typewriter, this watchmaker's son. So, and then you get this idea of an anniversary. So is it, an anniversary of him having died, but living on through his consciousness? Is it that it's the anniversary, actually his birthday, or from when he's been in and under house arrest or something like that?
I think it's Happy Death Day.
Maybe.
That's very much what I am assuming. I get the sense that I'm with you. Something seems off, so I'm wondering if it's and the 2 servants are very childlike, in their enthusiasm in certain things. So I'm wondering if it's slightly, like synthetic humans, clones, and it's a cloned body. He's building their clones, and it's his death day. And I get the feeling they will mix. That's a very comic booky thing that can be mixed in very easily. I
think particularly with the horseshoe instead of the knife, that's the one big indicator that you're there going, well, it's not that they've just taken the knives out of his house so they don't hurt himself. That's a very deliberate thing they've done here, going, but that's a horseshoe. And as he says it, you look down and see that he's holding a horseshoe in his hand. It's not that he's been given a horseshoe every breakfast for the last 20 years to cut his bacon and eggs with. This is a very specific reference to something very weird going on in this.
Yeah, it could get a little Westworldy to an extent with that. And as well, I think poor Miss Crookshanks, whilst I would quite like to have Jeremy Irons' body at that age. She is given the dubious task of massaging his thighs.
His inner thighs after his horse riding for too far. Yes. Interesting stuff. I did mean to mention, actually, Chris, when you mentioned the alternate 2019, that it's just slightly out from the world. It did feel a little bit like the way we were watching Pennyworth, which is 13 degrees out, the DC Universe's world of 1960s London. Well, now we have the DC Universe's world of 2019 in the Watchmen universe. So I kind of think there's a little allegory there. There's a little connection between the two of them. Slight though it may be. Chris, what's your middle point for 4 minutes to midnight?
So for me, I very quickly want to talk about the ending. That final scene, the lynching of Don Johnson, the discovery of the police chief being hung like that, that signifies, a definitive race piece into this. And we hear that racism is a big thing with the 7th Cavalry. Even though the chief is Caucasian, he has been basically taken away, and he's been terminated in a very symbolic way.
Yeah.
Especially because the main character then has to go out and find him like that.
Yeah.
This
is 100% a lynching. This is what they've done here. You know, I think when John and myself were watching, we were wondering what the symbolism of him not having his sock and shoe on. What's the symbolism of that? It's not any symbolism as such. It's that he's clearly dragged kicking and screaming from his car by multiple people and he's lynched. You know, even a person in such a high position as chief of police in this town can be lynched if in the wrong situation at the wrong time. So that's kind of what it's showing here. And it's a violent moment and you can feel the violence even though it's not on screen.
Yeah. That drop of blood falling from his body onto the police shield. It not only obviously just, replicating the previous, Watchmen, badge, the comedian's badge, or which was the symbol everyone knows of the smiley face with the blood on it. Obviously replicating that, but this really is setting up. This is like it's that showing of this is the beginning. This is the pilot. You are in this now, and it really it's okay. And we're off. It's the opening, and for me, it's the ending, and it's very much the beginning of the race.
Yes, the doomsday clock of the show has now been set to 5 minutes to midnight, just like at the beginning of the Watchmen comic book when the death of the comedian leads to that clock ticking down to midnight as well. Yeah, this is absolutely that moment. We now have a murder that needs to be solved in the same way as the Watchmen comic started. So leading into probably quite a massive storyline, I think, from here. So it's so significant, these moments in here. You know, Don Johnson as a character, I wanted to talk about him actually, as well, as we get into our notes. I'll talk about him a little bit because I have questions over him as a character as to who he is and who he might be, connected to the world. But this is a shocking ending to the show because I thought he was going to be a big character for the series, I thought, really.
Same. You assume someone of his acting chops would be basically on par with Jeremy Irons, so I was shocked that he wasn't. There's so much in this. As you said, the mystery is only starting. For example, who called? Was it the gentleman in the video in the police station where we see one of the 7th Cavalry, or was it the gentleman in the wheelchair? Who was it? Yeah. Like, there's so many questions that will come from this. But it really is super interesting.
Absolutely.
I think that kind of wraps up our middle points, and I think I hear the clock is a ticking.
The doomsday clock has been set to 3 minutes to midnight.
We are almost at midnight. Chris, what's the small thing about the episode that you want to talk about?
So, for me, it's who was the child? Is it, obviously we now see he become the adult in the chair, but what role will he play in this? We see him outside the bakery, and it's obvious a very definitive plant. He was there asking, oh, is it your bakery? He knows who to call. He knows that our lead actor is the hooded, police officer. He knows who she is, who basically, he knows her secret identity. But what else does he know? And going beyond that, it's kind of, who was the baby? Who did the baby grow up to become? Because if he grew up to become someone important, who was this child?
Yeah.
But that leads me even more, as I talked about in our previous episode in the prelude. I was fully expecting some of background characters to turn out to be very prominent, similar to Rorschach in the comic books. Rorschach was seen in very prominent spaces, such as funerals. In his civilian garb, so no one recognized him. And then and it was only when we saw flashbacks later on, in the comic book that it would, we understood who he was and who that character was and why it was significant. This sets up that premise for me as well, which is we see the guy in the wheelchair, and that could be anyone. Then we see him at the end, and then we also see that he was the child as well from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, he's holding the note, isn't he?
And it's also the way the camera stopped on certain. So when Regina King first comes out of the car and she sees her husband, and there's actually two people on the street, and they're perfectly framed. So it looks significant. Right. And so for me, it's very much, again, who watches The Watchmen? So who are these people watching The Watchmen or watching the police officers in this? So, and it's perfectly set up for, like, what is this mystery? One that I'm dying to know more about.
Absolutely. And I suppose one of the central tenets of The Watchmen as a story is that little changes being made in the world. What's their impact? What will happen to the world when these little changes happen? You know, what we see is after the attack early on in the episode on the black police officer who's trying to get his gun released by remote from head office. You know, the gun's being buzzed like 3 or 4 times before he gets to it. And finally he gets the gun released and then gets shot in the face because he wasn't able to defend himself effectively. Because of that happening, we get this idea that the police will now have guns accessible to them for the next 24 hours. No problems at all. So that's a little change in the world. So what's going to happen now? Will the increasing tensions that are happening in this city, will that lead to a big overflow of police officers killing people in the street just on sight effectively because they're getting more scared of what's going on around them. So I'm really, this is where the tension creeping up in this first episode, what it could lead to in the next episode, because things have already changed, I suppose.
Look at the amount of hamburgers the town's going to be able to have now. Well, it's a lot more iron in the meat than you expect. But the release of the guns meant an all-out siege could be done of that area. And it was again, it will be used in a way that, well, they actually end up having, we know what was transported in the truck, and the corn truck was transporting literally a Gatling gun, for the 7th Cavalry. As you said, this little butterfly wing, what effect will it have?
Exactly. John, your small moment for the episode?
Yeah, it's the silence of the cows. It is that, dare I say it, the massacre of Little Bighorns, with the cows being effectively shredded up, as you say, just in time for an iron-rich beef pate for a burger bun. So I really like this for a number of reasons. I love the aerial shot as they move their way towards this ranch in the dead of night. I love the fact that it's where we get to see Archibald, or Archie the owl, mobile, where it's kind of taking that overhead spot, and it intercepts the plane. It's a nice little moment, those big, bright eyes of the owl, it's just really iconic. So
interesting.
That was great. Yeah. And I like the fact that the ranchers who are effectively taking watch batteries, out of, electronic watches here. I think that's how I took it. And
are they the
that's
Watchmen?
what they were running off with to the airplane to make their getaway. So, this was a stalling act. Those cows being taken down, it was to stall, as they make, a getaway in the airplane, with all these sort of, the round batteries that you get in the back of watches. And I think, so that's kind of intriguing. It's like, obviously it's the watch, it's the Watchmen, the tick-tock, the 7th Cavalry have that, in their video that's played to the police that
they're all shouting
they all finish it off with tick-tock. So
it's just everybody in the city is going to be late for work tomorrow. Cause all their watches are gone.
Yeah, exactly. What are the watch batteries about? So really looking forward to seeing that. And also, again, just to really hammer home that the 7th Cavalry probably are going to be bad guys here. Absolutely. Then they kind of have that cyanide pill reference to sort of as top level Nazis used to do, so that they're not captured alive and so on. So I thought this was a really nice sequence. Even just seeing, Judd Crawford in the action in, Archie, as they take down the plane, and the classic flamethrower coming out the front as well. So that was just really nice to see. So that's my sort of little big moment for our 3 minutes to midnight.
Excellent.
Yeah, very, very quickly, just on the watch batteries, it's said by the character that before they removed the caustic ones, the cancery ones, or the energy ones. And if we see, again, little thing was that all the cars were electric.
Right.
None of them were gas powered. They all had electric battery. Even the pickup truck had an electric battery. So it seems like, again, maybe this is a Dr. Manhattan thing that, remember, in the comic books, he was creating, a renewable source of energy, it was one of his creations that he was working on, when Rorschach comes to see him for the first time.
He was working with Veidt,
Yes.
on that. So I'm wondering whether it was just, this is something Adrian Veidt has possibly introduced to the world as the smartest man on Earth.
Yes.
Especially after Dr. Manhattan left Earth. He's definitely the smartest man then. So that was, I suppose, the central kind of, back and forth between the two of them, was that actually Veidt's plan technically was sound. It just didn't take account of the fact that human beings would die. So Dr. Manhattan can kind of go along with it, but nobody else could. That's kind of the thing. Speaking of which, my tiny little moment about the episode that I want to talk about is Dr. Manhattan's crumbling space palace. I was really intrigued to see this because it came out of nowhere. It's the only appearance of Dr. Manhattan in this episode. It's just a very short moment when it's panning through tons of other stuff. You see a blue character on what looks like, or standing beside a massive sandcastle, effectively. That looks exactly like the sandcastle you see in the comic book, the castle that's built by Dr. Manhattan, on Mars, and it crumbles to pieces. So effectively, he was always keeping that alive by his own powers of his own mind, effectively. So possibly this is the reason he's going to return to Earth, is because his mind is now focused on something else. Something that he didn't expect to happen. Some big changes happened, and suddenly his mind has stopped needing to have this palace, so it's all crumbled, and now he's going to return to Earth. So I just thought it was really intriguing to have this split second, and I genuinely, if you were talking to somebody in the room, if you weren't looking at the screen at the time, you probably would have missed it. It's in there for like a really quick second.
It's on the news, isn't it? In one of the, I think it's Angela's house, or in Judd Crawford's house. Yeah,
really interesting. So our first, I suppose, moment of the Dr. Manhattan for the TV show in there for this episode. That's my moment, and I do hear the clock ticking down. We are now at 2 minutes to midnight.
The doomsday clock is now at 2 minutes. I repeat, 2 minutes to midnight.
Which means notes and Easter eggs, anything we haven't talked about. First up, John.
Yeah, I've got a few things. I've got It's Raining Squid.
Hallelujah.
It's Raining Squid. Yeah, I mean, that's just the reference to, I suppose, or link to the giant squid, who destroys New York in the comic book, and that there are still squid rain events happening. You see the cleaners cleaning up the kind of baby squid that have fallen from the sky, and you have in the home economics class where Angela is teaching them how to separate egg yolks from egg whites, which was actually pretty neat. I would not have ever thought of doing that. So I will probably have a go at trying to suck them out with an empty Coke bottle. But there is a poster up that is the anatomy of a squid in the classroom as well.
I was reminded that the squid that was in the comic book that was created by Adrian Veidt as a possible space alien, effectively. So potentially his genetic modification that created the giant squid has caused this raining squid for the next 35 years, because everybody, the air raid siren effectively goes off. Everybody just stops in their cars, waits for a second. The squid rain goes by and everybody just, moves their windscreen wipers back and forth, and then it's done,
Yeah, exactly. I mentioned about Tulsa 1921, before, about it actually happening. One of the other kind of historical references, is the 7th Cavalry. You have that conversation when the police officer right at the start, where he's stopped the pickup truck, is radioing in to get his firearm released, and he talks about 7th Cavalry contraband, that the 7th Cavalry had just gone into hiding and are now back with causing trouble with their Rorschach masks. But the 7th Cavalry is the cavalry brigade or regiment from the U.S. Army that is a Custer reference. So the Great Sioux War there and the Battle of Little Bighorn, where Custer was killed, it is the 7th Cavalry that was defeated there. They were sort of expanding the European Americans into the Native American Indian lands, and the Great Sioux War there on that western frontier. So, again, that idea of white supremacy moving forward and taking over indigenous lands. Their official nickname is Gary Owen, okay? And this is because their official marching tune is an Irish air called Gary Owen.
Interesting.
So that is why. And I think they still exist, because they were certainly in the Korean War, they were in World War II, so that, it is still an official regiment of the US Army. But, yes, the 7th Cavalry has the General, George A. Custer, reference here, who was obviously killed at the Battle of Little Bighorn.
Mm-hmm.
Custer's last stand.
Yes, Custer's last stand. The other thing is the pager as well that was going off in Angela's house and her husband. That had the sort of designation Little Bighorn on it as well.
It was the warning that was sent to her, wasn't it? Yeah, so she knew something bad was happening. So I guess that's a reference. That's what the police officers use when it's the 7th Cavalry warning, effectively, to send it out to all their stuff. We haven't talked even half enough about how amazing that character is in her fight sequence. After the silence of the cows, her fight sequence in that trailer was amazing. Her house setup, where she goes in and puts her hand behind her head and gets the shotgun into her hands and then gets another gun out from the fireplace. Cool as hell.
Yeah, that was pretty badass. Yeah. And her interrogation technique as well, after, Mirror Mask or Reflecty Face, had, sort of managed to realize that he was a member of the 7th Cavalry.
Looking Glass, John.
Yeah, that was really good.
Glass.
Yes, Looking Glass. So
that was waterboarding, right? Am I right in saying that that's what she's done? Because you hear the guy screaming a bit, and then he goes a little bit quiet, and water's coming out with blood in it until she walks out the door. With the reference of exactly what she needs to know, effectively.
It may not have been only waterboarding. I did feel there was a lot of scuffles and punches going on. I do like Judd Crawford's sort of wry smile when she comes out and goes, "It's a ranch." I thought that was quite a nice little touch.
Absolutely. Chris, any other stuff that you noticed that we haven't talked about on there?
Nothing that we haven't talked about. For me, I get the feeling that they probably peppered in a lot more, and it's going to take multiple viewings to catch everything in this show. But I think we've caught 99% of it, but obviously we want our fellow watchers to come in with some that we may have missed. So if you saw something that we did not catch, watchers, send us your feedback with that.
Excellent. Excellent, because I got a few more. One that we haven't even talked about at all. The Minutemen TV series that's being shown on television. The actual Minutemen. We have Hooded Justice in there on TV. It's shown in the house. We have the original Night Owl is shown on there as well. So loads of the major characters. Still Silk Spectre, a TV show that's being shown. And what I love, and I love the reference, it's called American Hero Story, not American Horror Story. So, obviously being produced on television as a replacement for American Horror Story,
yeah.
which I love.
And it's done as a cartoon as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And interesting. Yeah. They all look exactly like their comic book counterparts because they're all drawn exactly the same way. So very cool.
Yeah. I do know that there definitely is, greater ones with Hooded Justice in it as well. We'll see a lot more of that just from the trailers. Yeah. We know that there are scenes.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's going to be the background show that's going on, is the Minutemen TV show. Finally, it was my question, really, the one I've been talking about the whole time. I was wondering the whole episode, was Don Johnson's character, Judd Crawford, actually based on Dan Dreiberg, the character of Night Owl 2 from the 80s in the comic book. It's just because he's flying Archie, which I thought just seemed weird. The fact that he takes control and kind of pushes the other lieutenant out of the way, the other detective out of the way to get control of it and fire the flamethrower at the plane that they're chasing, feels like he's much more accustomed to being inside this machine. It just felt odd to me, you know. It would make sense that he would kind of retire out of a city like New York to a smaller town like Tulsa, to lead the police force, especially because of his experience in the past and because he had that relationship with Vice in the past. Potentially that's given him a kind of a leg up, in the world here, to allow himself to become the chief of police. Maybe that's why he doesn't care if anybody knows who he is, effectively. And I also thought, I know it sounds weird, but Judd is spelt with 2 D's and Dan Dreiberg, DD. So I was wondering if he chose the name Judd to reference the fact of Dan Dreiberg. I don't know. Unfortunately, the character's dead by the end of the episode, but maybe that's kicking out. You know, we did lose one of the original Minutemen, in the comedian to start off the Watchmen novel. Maybe we've just lost Dan Dreiberg, one of the Watchmen, to kick off this series of the show. We haven't seen any more episodes, so we don't know yet. That's my theory. What do you think?
Good stuff.
It's a good theory.
I like the idea that he could also be a massive undercover bad guy. Mm-hmm. But I suspect that might be way too obvious.
I think we were watching American Horror Story in 1984 and someone commits suicide in their cell, don't they? And it looks like they've committed suicide, and then you find out actually they've just used a bar to make it look like that. But I have a feeling that was definitely a lynching.
Yeah, he did look pretty dead,
yes,
didn't he?
Unfortunately. Gentlemen, let's get on to our closeout for the episode. What did you think of episode 1? It's summer, we're running out of ice.
Well, I've got to give a rating. Mm-hmm. I have modified my rating from the original one because of the brutality of the sheriff's death. But I give this a massively solid 4.5 romaine lettuce with a sprinkling of croutons out of 5. Because, yeah, I thought this was, as an opener, it just completely had me gripped. I love the references to the comic. I love the references to sort of real history. I absolutely loved the character of Angela. I think some of her lines are just classic. Really classic. I think, you know, there's some good sense of humor, some great action. I just love all the layers that you kind of would expect from a Damon Lindelof show. You would expect from something as deeply rich as The Watchmen to be able to sustain within a show, Easter eggs, references, you name it. But also the storyline is really interesting. You know, who is this kid? You know, how pivotal is this child now grown up, calling Angela to inform her that her friend and chief is swinging from the tree in that lynching, that mob lynching of people of color in the US that happen in the South, and that this has happened to her friend Judd Crawford, who he's called Uncle Judd. And, you know, they have this close connection with her family. So, you know, it's very personal. It's a message. And there is the guy still holding, his his piece of paper, watch over this boy, by the tree. It seems as though those two key figures are somehow pivotal in this to some degree or another, whether it's through their death or whether it's through what they witnessed in Tulsa in 1921 and how they've survived ever since. I think is really interesting.
By the two, you mean the sheriff and Louis Gossett Jr. who's in the wheelchair, that the two of them are pivotal. Definitely, yeah, this is where it's all kicking off from there. I'd agree with you, John. I think this is a really good, solid pilot episode for this show. Really, really looking forward to spending more time in this world. It's set up so quickly and with ease, really. You feel like you're right beside these new characters that you've never met before, and you're suddenly in their world and you want to spend more time with them. I don't mind watching it through a television screen. I'm just not too sure whether I want to actually live in it, though.
I think arguably part of the show is saying that maybe we are living in that kind of world.
Yeah, perhaps. Chris, what do you think of the show overall?
I really, really love this. For me, it's a hot, hot summer. Mm-hmm. And yes, we are out of ice. It's no longer running out. We are out. Who's going to the shops? It's a fantastic setup. It really is. It gives you enough shock, awe, intrigue. They perfectly set up the universe, but give you enough tidbits that you're questioning what's next. Beyond that, they start to then, you consider what is happening in the world in the 2019. So the 7th Cavalry versus the actual police force. You get all of these questions and you get all the answers at the same time. It's beautifully shot. We barely touched on the interrogation scene, which was just visually stunning. It really is just the action scenes, all culminating in that scene at the end where you're just left with questions over questions over questions, but finally just centralizing on the blood on the police badge, which is very symbolic for comic book fans. I'm absolutely totally on board with this episode. I'm totally on board with so far this show.
Excellent. A quick news break. Instead of our usual feedback section, I pulled out a quick discussion that Damon Lindelof had with Esquire magazine about the potential controversy around the show. I just loved this quote here. Esquire said in their article, "Make no mistake, people will be angry with the show. With its equal critiques of liberals and conservatives, Watchmen is shaping up to be the most controversial TV show debut of the fall, and one of the most polarizing superhero stories ever told. That's in keeping with the spirit of the original text, according to Lindelof, who said, it's essentially saying we have disdain for people at the center because they're not choosing a side, but we also have disdain for people who are in the extremes because you can't live in the extremes. And so let's just take the piss out of everyone and ourselves in the process," he says. There you go. So that's the sentiment we should be going into this show with, is this is going to piss all of us off. Everybody who's on any side of any argument. And if you take a side and try and stand by it, Lindelof's going to throw you a curveball because you need to just stop it. Take the piss out of yourself and just enjoy the ride, I think is kind of his plan for the shoshow. I can't imagine that episode after episode we're going to be coming out thinking, yeah, okay, that was acceptable. Let's enjoy the ride. Especially after an episode like this one. But a really good show so far.
Yeah. It really is. So, with that said, we want to make a quick announcement about another change for this podcast going forward. We're going to be releasing a second episode each week with your thoughts, reactions, and feedback to the episodes called Bulletin of Our Atomic Watchers. So send in your thoughts to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com or join us on our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries. We would also love to hear your dulcet tones on our podcast. So why not record a clip of yourself on your phone and email it to us over at feedback@tvpodcastindustry.com. Or you can go to our website and record up to 90 seconds of your thought about this week's episodes. You can do that at tvpodcastindustries.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from everyone, but the cutoff time for weekly feedback is Wednesday, 2 minutes to midday GMT, which is 1 p.m. Wednesday in Central Europe, which is 7 a.m. Wednesday for the US East Coast, which is 4 a.m. Wednesday for US West Coast, and is 10 p.m. Wednesday in Melbourne. I think we've about covered the globe there and the different time zones.
There's loads of other ones.
I think that's about all I can calculate at this moment. But yes, we would absolutely love to hear from you all on this really rich
Yes.
show.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us for the episode.
Yes, the only reason we did ask John to do it is because he is British, and all rules sound better when coming out with a British accent.
Absolutely. Definitely. Thanks so much for joining us, fellow watchers. We hope you stay subscribed to the podcast. And if you enjoy what you hear, why not share the podcast with your friends? Sharing the podcast is sharing the love. If you want to share more than love, though, you can go over to our Patreon at patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries. Throw us a couple of bucks. You can share our podcast with everybody as well. That's always good. 2 options for you there. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast itself, though, at tvpodcastindustry.com. We'll be back with episodes of our Watchmen coverage every Monday. Next Monday, on the 28th of October, we'll be covering Watchmen Episode 2, Martial Feats of Comanche Horsemanship. John, do you want to give us the official synopsis for that episode?
Sure. As Angela relives haunting memories of an attack on her family, she detains a mysterious man who claims responsibility for Tulsa's most recent murder. An original play is performed for an audience of 1.
Interesting. So I'm guessing the haunting memories of the attack on the family could possibly be the White Night that Angela talked about in this episode, that night where there was a big attack on the police force and her family were involved. So potentially it's that, but not too sure about the rest of the stuff. The audience of 1 is possibly going to be Jeremy Irons once again, because we don't really know what's going on with him. So, and they seem to want to keep him involved in these synopses, don't they?
Yeah. Or maybe it's Dr. Manhattan deciding to put on a play of his own.
Maybe.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Excellent. Well, bye-bye, watchers. Keep watching The Watchmen.
TikTok, TikTok. We're watching you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, fellow watchers. We'll speak with you again soon. Bye. This was a Televisual Podcast Industries production. You have been listening to the Watchmen podcast.